My name is Margaret Wilson, and at 68 years old, I never imagined I would walk out on my only daughter. For 4 decades I sacrificed everything for Rebecca, working 2 jobs, postponing dreams, emptying retirement accounts. Then last spring, as my granddaughter Emma knocked over an expensive vase, Rebecca exploded. "You ruined my life!" she screamed, her face contorted with rage. "I grew up with nothing because you couldn't provide." The words cut through me like glass. After all those years of giving, I quietly gathered my purse and cardigan. But before leaving, I placed my credit card on the kitchen counter. A mother teaches in unexpected ways. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and please subscribe to hear how that simple act changed both our lives forever. My story begins not with Rebecca's birth, but with her father's death. Thomas and I had been married just 3 wonderful years when the accident happened. He worked construction, taking extra shifts to save for our growing family. Rebecca was only 8 months old when the foreman showed up at our Pennsylvania apartment, hat in hand. A scaffold collapse. Thomas was gone before the ambulance arrived. The grief was suffocating. At 25, I became a widow with an infant daughter and barely enough life insurance to cover the funeral expenses. Those first months passed in a blur of tears and sleepless nights, trying to comfort a baby who seemed to sense her father's absence. I had no choice but to move back to my hometown in northern New Jersey, where my parents could help while I figured out our future. "You and the baby can stay as long as you need," my father said as he carried our suitcases into my childhood bedroom. My mother had already set up a second-hand crib beside my old twin bed. I had completed 2 years of college before marrying Thomas, with dreams of becoming a teacher. Now, with a child depending solely on me, finishing my degree became not just a dream but a necessity. The community college 30 minutes away offered night classes, and my parents agreed to watch Rebecca while I attended. "We'll make it work," my mother assured me, though I could see the worry in her eyes. She and Dad were already in their 60s, and chasing after an increasingly mobile baby wasn't easy for them. Those years were an exhausting blur. Days spent caring for Rebecca, evenings rushing to classes, nights studying until my eyes burned. The small survivors' benefit from Social Security barely covered diapers and formula. I took a part-time job at the local library that allowed me to bring Rebecca along on quiet days. Every penny was budgeted, every expense questioned. Could I cut Rebecca's hair myself instead of paying for a trim? Could I mend these pants one more time? Could dinner be beans and rice again this week? Despite our struggles, Rebecca was a sunny, sweet child. Her first word was book. Not surprising given how many hours we spent reading together on our second-hand couch. She had Thomas's warm brown eyes and curious nature, always asking why about everything she encountered. Those moments of connection were precious islands of joy in a sea of constant worry. "Mommy, why don't we go on vacation like Lizzie's family?" she asked once around age 6, after hearing about her friend's trip to Disney World. "Well, sweetie," I explained gently, "different families have different amounts of money to spend. We use our money for our home and your school things." She nodded solemnly. "That's okay. I like our home." That simple acceptance warmed my heart, though I wondered how long such understanding would last. Children inevitably compare their circumstances to others, and I worried about the day Rebecca might resent our limitations. By the time Rebecca entered elementary school, I had completed my teaching degree and secured a position at a local public school. The salary wasn't impressive, but it offered stability and, crucially, the same schedule as Rebecca, eliminating childcare concerns. My parents' health had begun to decline, making their help less reliable, though they remained loving presences in our lives. Our first apartment was tiny but clean, with a small playground nearby. I took on tutoring jobs during evenings and weekends to supplement our income. Every extra dollar went into a college fund for Rebecca, or toward saving for a modest house of our own. The memory of Thomas fueled my determination on the hardest days. "I promise she'll have opportunities, Thomas," I whispered some nights, looking at our wedding photo. "She'll go to college. She'll have choices we didn't have." When Rebecca turned 12, my years of saving finally yielded enough for a down payment on a small Cape Cod house in a decent school district. It needed work. The kitchen cabinets were from the 1960s, the single bathroom had cracked tiles, And the backyard was more weeds than grass, but it was ours. My own bedroom, Rebecca exclaimed, twirling around the small space with its faded wallpaper. I'd promised we could redecorate it however she wanted, though however had definite budget constraints. Those early years in our house were some of our happiest. Rebecca joined the school band, playing the flute her grandfather had found at a yard sale and I had paid to recondition. She made good friends in the neighborhood and excelled academically. I began to believe we had weathered the worst, that the sacrifice and struggle had been worth it. What I didn't realize then was that the modest contentment of our life together was about to face a new challenge, one I hadn't prepared for. As Rebecca approached her teenage years, the simple acceptance she had shown toward our financial limitations began to erode, replaced by something I would only later recognize as entitlement. Rebecca's transformation during high school seemed to happen overnight, though in reality it was a gradual shift. The sweet girl who had been content with library books and backyard adventures became increasingly focused on what she didn't have compared to her peers. Our solid middle-class life, which had felt like such an achievement to me, began to look woefully inadequate through her adolescent eyes. Started with clothes. The second-hand outfits and sale rack finds that had previously been accepted without complaint suddenly became sources of embarrassment. "Mom, nobody wears these brands," Rebecca complained, holding up a perfectly good sweater I'd found on clearance. Alexis said it looked like I shop at a thrift store. The hurt in her eyes was genuine, and I remembered my own teenage desire to fit in. Perhaps I had been naive to think she wouldn't care about such things. That weekend, I dipped into my savings to buy her 2 full-price outfits from the mall stores her friends frequented. The smile on her face seemed worth the expense, though the pattern it established would prove problematic. Our modest home became another source of tension. When friends came over, Rebecca would apologize for the small house or the outdated kitchen. I overheard her telling her best friend Katie that we were planning a renovation soon. A complete fabrication that stung with its implication that our home wasn't good enough as it was. "Why would you tell Katie we're renovating?" I asked later. Rebecca shrugged, not meeting my eyes. Her family just put in a pool and a new kitchen. I just didn't want her to think we're poor. "Rebecca, we're not poor. We're fortunate to have this house and everything we need. Not having luxury items doesn't make us poor." She rolled her eyes in that distinctly teenage way. "You don't understand what it's like. Everyone at school has so much more." The everyone was an exaggeration, of course. Our suburban New Jersey town had a mix of economic levels, but Rebecca had gravitated toward friendships with students from the wealthier families. Their vacations to Europe, their Sweet 16 parties with higher DJs, their casual mentions of household help, all became standards against which our life was measured and found wanting. When Rebecca turned 16, the subject of a car arose. I had been saving for this milestone, knowing it was important and also practical given my long teaching hours and her after-school activities. After careful research and budget calculations, I found a 5-year-old Honda Civic with reasonable mileage that a colleague was selling. "It's reliable, good on gas, and has all the safety features I want for you," I explained, genuinely excited to present this major gift that represented months of extra tutoring hours. Rebecca looked at the navy blue sedan parked in our driveway and made a visible effort to seem appreciative. "Thanks, Mom. It's nice." Later that week, I overheard her on the phone with Katie. "Yeah, it's just some old Honda. My mom thinks it's great because it's practical." The air quotes were audible in her tone. Melissa's parents got her a brand new Volkswagen for her birthday, with leather seats. The conversation confirmed a growing pattern. No matter what I provided, it was measured against what someone else had received and found lacking. The grateful child who had once accepted our circumstances with grace was disappearing, replaced by someone I sometimes barely recognized. The college application process brought these tensions to a breaking point. I had been clear with Rebecca since her freshman year that while I had saved for her education, there were financial realities we needed to consider. The state universities offered excellent education at a fraction of the cost of private colleges, and with her grades, scholarships were a possibility. "But everyone's applying to NYU and Boston University," she protested during our first serious discussion about college options. "State school is where you go if you can't get in anywhere good." "That's simply not true," I countered. And taking on massive student loan debt isn't a wise start to your adult life. You just don't want me to succeed, she shouted, storming to her room and slamming the door with a force that rattled the family photos in the hallway. It was our first major confrontation, and it left me shaken. When had my desire to provide a stable, financially responsible life for us become, in her eyes, a limitation on her future? When had my practical cautions become evidence that I didn't want her to succeed? In the end, I made what I knew was a financially unwise decision. When Rebecca was accepted to her dream school, a prestigious private university with minimal financial aid offered, I remortgaged our home to help cover the costs. The pride in her eyes when she received the acceptance packet momentarily overshadowed my anxiety about how we would manage the payments. I knew you'd figure it out, Mom, she said, hugging me with genuine warmth for the first time in months. This is going to change everything for me. The day we drove to campus for freshman move-in was bittersweet. Rebecca chattered excitedly about her courses, her roommate, the campus activities she planned to join. I smiled and listened, pushing aside thoughts of the second job I would need to take on to meet the new mortgage payments. As we unloaded her belongings, I noticed her glancing nervously at my aging Corolla among the newer, luxury vehicles other parents had arrived in. When another student asked where we were from, Rebecca quickly answered before I could speak, subtly creating distance between us in a way that hurt more than she likely realized. Mom, I think I've got it from here, she said after we had arranged her dorm room. There's a parent reception thing, but it's probably going to be boring. You probably want to get on the road before it gets too late. It was a dismissal, though gently delivered. I hugged her tightly, fighting back tears. I'm so proud of you, I whispered. Your father would be too. Driving home alone to our empty house, I confronted an uncomfortable truth. For 18 years, my identity had been completely wrapped up in being Rebecca's mother. Providing for her, sacrificing for her, planning for her future. With her gone, who was I beyond that role? The question haunted me as I rattled around our suddenly too quiet home, and I had no ready answer. The first months of Rebecca's college experience brought infrequent calls home, usually initiated by me and often cut short with excuses about study groups or social events. I tried not to take it personally, remembering my own excitement and independence when I'd started college years ago. Still, the distance felt like more than just physical miles. When Rebecca did reach out unprompted, it was typically with financial requests. Mom, everyone's going to Montreal for fall break. It's only $300 for the whole weekend, she explained during one such call in October. I was grading papers at the kitchen table, a stack of bills beside me including the notice for the first payment on her student loans. Honey, I just don't think that's in our budget right now, I said carefully. The first tuition payment has stretched things pretty thin. But this is part of the college experience, she protested. It's not just classes, it's connections. Katie's parents already sent her the money. The comparison to her more affluent friends had become a familiar pressure point. After further discussion that left us both frustrated, I agreed to send half the amount, promising to wire it the next day. It meant postponing some necessary home repairs, but I rationalized that social connections were indeed important to her college experience. This pattern repeated throughout her freshman year. The winter formal dress that cost more than my monthly utility bills. The laptop upgrade because her perfectly functional computer was too slow for her projects. The summer abroad program that was crucial for her resume but required an additional loan on my part. I mailed care packages with homemade cookies and handwritten notes of encouragement. She rarely acknowledged receiving them, though her roommate once messaged me a thank you for including her in the treats. I sent small surprises for holidays and achievements, a scarf for Valentine's Day, a gift card to the campus bookstore when she made the dean's list. When Parents' Weekend arrived in the spring, I took Friday off work and drove the 4 hours to campus, excited to see her world and meet her friends. Rebecca met me in the parking lot, visibly tense as I stepped out of my 8-year-old Corolla. Mom, you didn't need to come for the whole weekend, she said, hugging me quickly. Most parents are just coming for Saturday. I wanted to see your classes tomorrow, I explained, confused by her lukewarm reception. And I brought those brownies you like for your study group. The weekend continued in this uncomfortable vein. Rebecca introduced me to friends with obvious reluctance, steered me away from planned parent activities, and suggested we eat at a campus dining hall rather than the restaurants where other families were gathering. When a classmate asked what I did for work, Rebecca interrupted my response about teaching with, "My mom's in education administration," a deliberate inflation of my position that made me feel simultaneously embarrassed and hurt. On the drive home Sunday, I confronted the growing distance between us. "Rebecca, I felt like you were ashamed of me this weekend," I said quietly. "That's ridiculous," she responded, though her gaze remained fixed out the passenger window. "I was just busy. There's a lot going on at school. You know I'm proud of you, right? Of everything you're accomplishing." She nodded absently. "I know, Mom. Hey, can we stop for coffee? There's a Starbucks at the next exit." The subject was closed, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Something fundamental had shifted in our relationship, and I wasn't sure how to bridge the widening gap. During her sophomore year, Rebecca announced she wanted to study abroad in Paris for a semester. The program costs were substantial, nearly $15,000 beyond her regular tuition. When I expressed concern about the expense, she was prepared with a counterargument. "Everyone in my major does a semester abroad. It'll look terrible on my resume if I don't have international experience. Plus, you always said education was the most important investment." "I did say that," I acknowledged. "But there's a difference between investment and financial strain. We're already stretching to cover your current tuition. You could take out a home equity loan," she suggested casually, as if recommending I pick up milk at the grocery store. Katie's parents did that for her semester in London. The ease with which she proposed I take on additional debt stunned me. Nevertheless, I found myself at the bank the following week, signing paperwork for a loan against the house that had taken me years to pay down. I took on extra weekend tutoring hours and cut back on everything from groceries to heating, keeping the thermostat at 65 degrees through the New Jersey winter. Rebecca returned from Paris transformed, more sophisticated in dress and manner, with a collection of fashionable European clothes and a slight affected accent when pronouncing certain words. She showed minimal interest in the sacrifices that had funded her experience, instead focusing on how provincial America seemed after Europe. "You should really travel more, Mom," she commented over holiday break. "It broadens your perspective so much." The irony that my lack of travel was directly related to funding her seemed lost on her. By senior year, the pattern was firmly established. Rebecca's requests became expectations, her gratitude when those expectations were met was minimal, and her disappointment when I occasionally set boundaries was disproportionate and guilt-inducing. For months I saved for a graduation gift, putting aside a portion of each paycheck to purchase a new laptop to replace her now truly outdated one. The Apple MacBook was the most expensive single item I had ever bought besides a car or house, requiring 6 months of careful budgeting and extra tutoring sessions. When she opened it after the graduation ceremony, her response was a tepid "Thanks, Mom. This will be useful," before quickly moving on to discuss dinner plans with her friends. Later, I overheard her telling Katie it was a practical gift, in a tone that suggested practicality was somehow disappointing. As Rebecca packed to move to New York City for her first job in marketing, I helped wrap her dishes in newspaper and sort through belongings. "You can always come home if the city gets overwhelming," I offered. "Your room will be here." "I don't think that'll be necessary," she replied, not looking up from her packing. "But maybe you could finally update this room?" It's still got my high school posters up. After she left, the house felt emptier than ever. I was 57, facing retirement in the coming years with depleted savings and a remortgaged home. The financial sacrifices had been my choice, made out of love and a desire to give Rebecca opportunities. But as I sat alone in her freshly vacated bedroom, I wondered if those sacrifices had taught her the wrong lesson entirely. Rebecca's career in Manhattan started promisingly with an entry-level position at a prestigious marketing firm. Her business degree and semester abroad made her an attractive candidate, and she frequently reminded me how her investments in education were paying off. Within 18 months, she had received 2 promotions and moved from a shared apartment in Queens to her own studio in a doorman building on the Upper East Side. "The rent is ridiculous," she admitted during one of our monthly phone calls, "but location is everything in New York." All the important networking happens in this neighborhood. I made appropriate sounds of understanding, though the amount she casually mentioned spending on rent each month was nearly 2/3 of my teaching salary. I didn't mention that I was delaying my retirement by at least 5 years due to the college loans and home equity debt I was still paying off. The pattern of our communication had settled into a predictable rhythm. Rebecca would call every few weeks, briefly outline her career developments and social activities, then inevitably transition to some financial concern or request. "My credit card is maxed out from furnishing the apartment," she explained 6 months after her move. "Could you help me out just until my next bonus? It's only $4,000. $4,000 isn't a small amount, Rebecca," I responded, mentally calculating how such a sum would impact my already stretched budget. "What about your emergency fund?" She laughed as if I'd said something amusing. "Mom, nobody my age has an emergency fund in New York. The city is too expensive. We're all just hustling until we make it big." Despite my reservations, I transferred the money from my dwindling savings. It was supposed to be a loan, but when I gently inquired about repayment 3 months later, Rebecca seemed genuinely surprised. "Things are still really tight right now," she explained. "The year-end bonus should be good though." The temporary loans became a regular occurrence, always with promises of repayment that never materialized. Meanwhile, Rebecca's social media showed brunches at trendy restaurants, weekend getaways to the Hamptons, and an ever-rotating wardrobe of designer clothes. When I once commented on a particularly expensive-looking handbag in a photo, she quickly responded that it was an investment piece and changed the subject. Around this time, I experienced a health scare, chest pains that sent me to the emergency room one night after school. It turned out to be a combination of stress and minor heart inflammation, requiring medication and a warning from my doctor to reduce stress and improve my self-care routines. When I called Rebecca to update her, she listened distractedly before interrupting. "That's concerning, Mom, but I'm sure it's nothing serious. Listen, I hate to switch topics, but I need your advice on something important. I've been invited to a destination wedding in Barbados, and I'm not sure if I should put the flights on my credit card or ask for an advance on my paycheck." The conversation shifted entirely to her dilemma, my health concerns forgotten. I realized with a pang that she hadn't even offered to come visit or help in any way. The contrast between my lifelong prioritization of her needs and her casual dismissal of mine was startling in its clarity. 2 years into her New York life, Rebecca met Jason Harrington at a charity gala her firm had organized. He came from a wealthy Connecticut family and worked in finance, with a lifestyle even more lavish than the one Rebecca had cultivated. Their relationship progressed quickly, and within a year, they were engaged. "His family has a summer home in the Hamptons," she told me excitedly. "And you should see the ring, Mom. It's 3 carats." I was happy for her happiness, though concerned about the emphasis she placed on Jason's family wealth rather than his character, or how he treated her. When we arranged for me to meet Jason and his parents, Rebecca called with detailed instructions. "They're very traditional," she explained. "Mrs. Harrington will probably be wearing Chanel or something similar. Do you have anything appropriate?" The implication that my normal wardrobe wouldn't be appropriate stung, but I went shopping and spent far too much on a conservative dress I would likely never wear again. The meeting at an expensive Manhattan restaurant was uncomfortable from the start. The Harringtons were polite but distant, asking vague questions about my career and education, while sharing stories of their various properties and recent travels. Rebecca seemed like a different person in their presence, laughing a bit too loudly at Mr. Harrington's jokes, adopting mannerisms that weren't her own, and occasionally shooting me warning glances when I spoke. Jason himself was pleasant enough, though he referred to my teaching career as noble, in a tone that somehow made it sound like a quaint hobby rather than the profession that had supported his fiancée's upbringing and education. As wedding planning began, the true financial impact became clear. Rebecca called with a detailed breakdown of costs and her expectation of my contribution. "The venue alone is $65,000, she explained. "Jason's parents are covering that and the catering. We thought you could handle the flowers, photography, and my dress." The casual way she assigned me expenses totaling over $30,000 left me speechless momentarily. Rebecca, I don't have that kind of money, I finally managed. I'm still paying off your college loans. Mom, this is my wedding, she replied, her voice taking on the edge that had become familiar whenever I didn't immediately accommodate her expectations. You always said you were saving for my future. This is my future. Can't you take out another loan? Ashamed to admit I had already leveraged everything I could, I promised to figure something out. This meant withdrawing from my retirement account, incurring substantial penalties, and leaving my financial future even more precarious. When I sent Rebecca the check representing nearly all I could access, her response was a brief text. Thanks, but the photographer just raised his rate. Can you send another $3,000? The wedding planning proceeded with minimal input from me, despite my significant financial contribution. When I offered suggestions for reducing costs, Rebecca dismissed them as cheap options that would embarrass her in front of Jason's family. The one time I tried to speak directly with the florist about possibly scaling back the elaborate arrangements, Rebecca called me in tears. You're ruining everything, she sobbed. The Harringtons already think we're barely middle class. Do you want them to think we're completely tasteless too? Rather than argue, I withdrew further from the process, becoming little more than a checkbook for Rebecca's increasingly extravagant vision. I even spent months sewing my own mother-of-the-bride dress to save money, only to have Rebecca insist I buy a designer outfit instead. Mom, you can't wear something homemade to my wedding, she said when I showed her the nearly completed garment I'd worked on for weeks. Everyone will be in designer clothes. You'll look so out of place. I maxed out my only credit card on a dress I would wear once, swallowing my hurt at her rejection of my handiwork, and the implication that I would embarrass her among her new social circle. The wedding itself was beautiful but surreal. I felt like an extra in an elaborate production rather than the mother of the bride. Rebecca barely spoke to me during the reception, busy circulating among the Harringtons' wealthy friends and colleagues. Several guests expressed surprise when learning I was Rebecca's mother, one commenting that we seemed so different. Jason's mother introduced me to her friends as Rebecca's mother, the schoolteacher, with a tone that might be used to describe an exotic but somewhat puzzling specimen. After the honeymoon, Rebecca's calls became even less frequent, mostly centered around holiday planning or, predictably, financial requests. The young couple had established a lifestyle well beyond even their combined substantial incomes, regularly running short despite what should have been more than adequate resources. I tried to maintain our connection through small gestures, birthday cards, care packages of homemade treats, offers to visit. Rebecca's responses were increasingly perfunctory. When I suggested coming to the city for a weekend visit, she always had some reason why the timing wasn't convenient. Our relationship had become transactional in a way that broke my heart, but I didn't know how to repair what had been lost. The birth of my granddaughter Emma brought a fragile hope for reconnection. Rebecca had called with the news, sounding genuinely excited to share something with me that wasn't related to money or status. She's perfect, Mom, Rebecca said, her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. 7 pounds 2 ounces. Would you like to come meet her this weekend? The invitation was unexpected and welcome. I arrived at their new home in Connecticut bearing carefully selected gifts. A handmade quilt I'd spent months creating, a silver rattle similar to one Rebecca had treasured as a baby, and several classic children's books I'd saved from Rebecca's childhood. Emma was indeed perfect, with Rebecca's brown eyes and a dusting of dark hair. Holding her, I felt a rush of love and protective instinct that reminded me of holding Rebecca for the first time. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought perhaps this new life might bridge the growing chasm between us. Rebecca and Jason had purchased a sprawling colonial in an exclusive suburb shortly before Emma's birth. The house was impressive 5 bedrooms, professionally decorated, with manicured grounds maintained by a landscaping service. It was also, I suspected, well beyond what they could comfortably afford, even with their combined salaries and whatever family assistance the Harringtons might provide. Do you like it? Rebecca asked as she gave me a tour, pride evident in her voice. The school district is the best in the state, and most of Jason's colleagues from the firm live in this area. It's beautiful, I answered truthfully. Very grand. We wanted Emma to have the best of everything, she explained, leading me into a nursery that looked like it belonged in a luxury design magazine. complete with a hand-painted mural and custom furniture. As Emma grew from newborn to infant to toddler, I made the 90-minute drive to Connecticut every weekend I could manage, despite increasing pain from arthritis in my knees. These visits became the center of my life, a chance to build a relationship with my granddaughter and perhaps repair some of the damage with Rebecca. The reality, however, was more complicated. While Rebecca welcomed the free childcare, she often used my visits as opportunities to run errands, have lunch with friends, or catch up on sleep. I treasured the time with Emma, but couldn't help noticing how Rebecca scrutinized and critiqued my caregiving. "Mom, we don't let her have juice. It's full of sugar," she would comment, or "Please don't read that book. We're trying to expose her only to gender-neutral stories." I adapted as best I could to their parenting preferences, though many seemed unnecessarily rigid or focused on appearances rather than Emma's happiness. Jason was pleasant during my visits but increasingly distant, often working late or disappearing to his home office. I sensed tension between them but didn't feel it was my place to inquire. As Emma approached her 4th birthday, signs of financial strain became more evident beneath the carefully maintained facade of affluence. Rebecca called more frequently with emergency requests, private preschool tuition that was unexpectedly due, property taxes they had somehow not budgeted for, home repairs they couldn't postpone. "It's just temporary," she assured me after a particularly large request. "Jason's expecting a major bonus next quarter." During one weekend visit, I arrived to find Rebecca unusually tense, checking her phone constantly and snapping at both Emma and me over minor issues. When I asked if everything was all right, she brushed off my concern. "Just work stress. Nothing important." Later that evening, after Emma was in bed, I overheard a heated conversation between Rebecca and Jason in their home office. Though I couldn't make out specific words, the tone was unmistakably one of financial distress. The next morning, Rebecca was uncharacteristically subdued, while Jason left early for a meeting despite it being Sunday. 2 weeks later, Rebecca called in tears. "Mom, I need to ask you something important," she began, her voice shaking. "We're having some temporary cash flow issues. The mortgage. We're a few months behind." The admission clearly cost her pride, but the request that followed stunned me nonetheless. "The bank is threatening foreclosure. We need $80,000 to get current. I know it's a lot, but maybe you could take out a loan against your retirement? It would just be until Jason's bonus comes through." My hand tightened around the phone. The amount she was casually requesting represented most of what remained of my retirement savings after years of helping with Rebecca's financial emergencies. "Rebecca, that's nearly everything I have left for retirement," I said carefully. "Have you considered other options? Maybe downsizing to something more affordable?" "Downsizing," she repeated as if I'd suggested they live in a cardboard box. "Mom, this is our home. Emma's home. We can't just move her away from her friends and her preschool. And what would people think?" The conversation continued in circles, with Rebecca becoming increasingly desperate and manipulative. She mentioned Emma repeatedly, implying my reluctance would hurt my granddaughter. She referenced all she had accomplished in her career, suggesting their current situation was merely a temporary setback that family should help with. Finally, exhausted and heartsick, I agreed to withdraw the funds, knowing it meant working until I was physically unable and a far more modest retirement than I had planned. The relief in Rebecca's voice was palpable, though gratitude was minimal and perfunctory. The following Sunday, I arrived for my usual visit with a cashier's check, representing the vast majority of my financial security. Emma greeted me excitedly at the door, wrapping her small arms around my legs. "Grandma, I made you a picture." Her enthusiasm warmed my heart despite the heaviness I felt about the check in my purse. Rebecca was more animated than she had been in weeks, clearly relieved by the financial lifeline I was providing. Dinner that evening was unusually pleasant, with Rebecca reminiscing about family memories and Jason more engaged than he had been during recent visits. Emma was delighted by the rare harmony, chattering happily about preschool and showing off new skills. As we moved to the living room for dessert, Emma, excited by the festive mood, began spinning around the room with her arms outstretched. Despite Rebecca's warning to be careful, the child collided with a side table, sending a large crystal vase crashing to the floor. The shattering sound was followed by a moment of stunned silence, then Emma's frightened wail. Before I could move to comfort her, Rebecca erupted. Emma! That vase was from Italy. It cost more than $1,000. She shouted, her face flushing with disproportionate rage. Why can't you ever listen? Emma's tears intensified, her small body shaking with sobs. I moved to gather her into my arms, disturbed by Rebecca's reaction to what was clearly an accident. She's just a child, Rebecca, I said quietly, stroking Emma's hair. Things can be replaced. That's easy for you to say, Rebecca snapped, rounding on me with startling venom. You've always had this poverty mindset. This attitude that things don't matter, that we should just make do with less. Rebecca. Jason interjected, looking uncomfortable. No, she continued, years of resentment suddenly pouring forth. You ruined my life. I grew up with nothing because you couldn't provide. Do you know what it was like being the only kid without vacations to talk about? With second-hand clothes and a mother who couldn't even afford a decent car? Her words struck like physical blows. Rebecca, I did the best I could. I was alone. And now you're trying to ruin Emma's life with the same poverty mindset. Suggesting we downsize, like having a nice home is some kind of luxury we don't deserve. Jason stood awkwardly, clearly unwilling to intervene in the family drama unfolding in his living room. Emma clung to me, her small face buried against my shoulder, still crying softly. As Rebecca continued her tirade, detailing all the ways my financial limitations had allegedly damaged her childhood, something shifted inside me. The hurt remained, but alongside it grew a clarity I had never experienced before. For decades, I had accepted Rebecca's increasing demands and diminishing gratitude as somehow my failure. A sign I hadn't provided enough, hadn't taught her the right values, hadn't been enough as a mother. But watching her now, face contorted with materialistic rage over a broken object while her child trembled in fear, I saw the truth with painful clarity. The problem had never been what I couldn't give her. It was that I had given too much too easily, without requiring appreciation or responsibility in return. I had created this entitled adult by trying to compensate for the loss of her father with things I couldn't afford. And now I was watching history repeat itself with Emma. Gently, I set Emma down and knelt to her level. Accidents happen, sweetheart, I said softly. Why don't you help Grandma clean up the pieces? Then we'll have some ice cream. Don't coddle her, Rebecca snapped. She needs to learn consequences. I straightened slowly, feeling every one of my 68 years in my tired bones. Without responding to Rebecca, I gathered my purse and cardigan from the hall closet. With deliberate calm, I took the cashier's check from my purse and placed it on the kitchen counter. Mom? What are you doing? Rebecca asked, her anger momentarily displaced by confusion. I removed my credit card and set it beside the check. Teaching consequences, I replied quietly. Rebecca stared at the card, then at me, comprehension slowly dawning. You're leaving? Now. Because of one argument.
No, Rebecca.
Not because of one argument. Because of 20 years of arguments where money substituted for respect and gratitude. I'm leaving because I finally understand that by giving you everything, I've taught you to value nothing. So you're just abandoning your family? Your granddaughter. Her voice rose again, manipulative tears replacing anger. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm simply stopping the cycle. I turned to Emma, who watched with confused eyes. Grandma loves you very much, Emma. I'll see you soon. Without another word, I walked out the door to my car, hands shaking but steps firm. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Rebecca in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway with my credit card in her hand, her expression a mix of shock and outrage. For the first time in decades, I felt not just sadness or hurt, but something unexpected relief. Whatever happened next would be difficult, but it would be honest. And perhaps that was the greatest gift I could finally give both of us. The drive home from Connecticut that evening remains vivid in my memory. The steady rhythm of windshield wipers against unexpected spring rain, the soft instrumental music I didn't really hear, and most of all, the strange mixture of devastation and liberation coursing through me. I had left behind not just my credit card and retirement savings, but a lifetime pattern of enabling behavior that had damaged us both. My small Cape Cod house welcomed me with familiar creaks and shadows. I moved through darkened rooms without turning on lights, eventually settling at the kitchen table where so many decisions about Rebecca's life had been made over the years. Tears came then. Not the gasping sobs I had expected, but a steady, quiet flow of grief for what had been lost and what had never been. The first week passed in eerie silence. No calls or texts from Rebecca, though I hadn't really expected any. I moved through my teaching days on autopilot, returned home to empty rooms, and tried to absorb the magnitude of what had happened and what it meant for our future. I had anticipated anger, perhaps even threats about restricting access to Emma, but the silence itself became its own kind of punishment. Had I miscalculated? Had my moment of clarity been nothing more than selfish abandonment of my child when she needed me? On the 8th day, my phone rang with Rebecca's distinctive tone. My hand trembled slightly as I answered. "Mom." Her voice was tight, controlled. "I think we need to discuss what happened." "I agree," I replied, working to keep my own voice steady. "You left your credit card." The accusation was immediate. "I tried to use it for Emma's prescription and it was declined. The bank said you reported it lost and canceled it." Of course, the financial inconvenience had prompted contact, not concern for our relationship. "I didn't report it lost," I explained calmly. "I closed the account. It seemed the responsible thing to do since I left the card behind intentionally." "You're punishing me," she said, her voice rising. "For one argument, you're cutting me off financially and punishing your granddaughter in the process." "Rebecca, this isn't about punishment. It's about boundaries I should have established long ago. I love you and Emma more than anything in this world, but I can't continue enabling financial behaviors that are harmful to all of us." "Harmful," she scoffed. "You sound like those self-help books. We're talking about family support. That's what families do. Support should go both ways," I said gently. "When was the last time you asked how I was doing? Whether I had enough for retirement? Whether I was happy?" The silence that followed was telling. "What about the check?" she finally asked, her voice smaller. "I've canceled that too," I admitted. "I realized giving you that money would only postpone the inevitable. You and Jason need to make serious changes to your spending habits and lifestyle. So you're just going to let us lose our home?" The familiar manipulation tactics emerged. "Let Emma be uprooted from everything she knows? You have options that don't involve my retirement savings," I said firmly. "Downsizing to a more affordable home isn't a tragedy, Rebecca. Losing your financial future because of pride and appearances, that's the real tragedy." Her response was immediate and vicious. "I don't even know who you are anymore. I guess all that talk about wanting the best for me was just talk. When it really matters, you're choosing yourself over your family." The call ended with her hanging up, leaving me shaken but still certain I had made the necessary, if painful, choice. The weeks that followed were a crash course in establishing financial independence I should have maintained all along. I closed joint accounts, removed Rebecca as an authorized user on my remaining credit card, and made an appointment with a financial advisor to assess my precarious situation. "It's not as bad as you feared," Linda, the advisor, assured me after reviewing my finances. "Your pension is secure, and you still have some retirement savings left. But you're right that selling your home might be the best option to ensure a comfortable retirement." The idea of leaving the house where Rebecca had grown up, where I had planted gardens and painted rooms and built a life, was painful. But I knew Linda was right. The house was too large for me alone, required maintenance I could no longer easily afford, and represented my largest potential asset. "I'll need something smaller, preferably without stairs," I told her, thinking of my increasingly troublesome knees. "And I'd like to stay in the area if possible." Linda nodded. "Let's run some numbers and see what makes sense." As I worked to rebuild my financial security, I also began the equally important work of rebuilding my identity beyond Rebecca's mother. For so long, every decision had been filtered through that primary role. Now, I had the opportunity and necessity to rediscover who Margaret Wilson was on her own terms. The process was both terrifying and exhilarating. I joined a community garden, something I'd always wanted to do, but had never found time for between teaching and Rebecca's needs. Working with my hands in the soil proved unexpectedly therapeutic. The The tangible results of seedlings pushing through earth providing satisfaction, I had forgotten existed. Old friendships, long neglected in favor of weekend drives to Connecticut, slowly rekindled. Susan Thomas, a fellow teacher who had retired 2 years earlier, invited me to her book club. "We've been wanting you to join forever," she said warmly. "I know weekends were always devoted to your granddaughter." The casual comment revealed how one-sided my life had become. Everyone around me had seen it, even as I remained blind to the imbalance. Most surprising was the reconnection with my younger sister Barbara. We had drifted apart after our parents' deaths, contact reduced to holiday cards and occasional phone calls. When I finally called her to share what had happened with Rebecca, her response was startling in its clarity. "Maggie, I've been waiting for this call for 20 years, she said, using my childhood nickname. "Rebecca has been taking advantage of you since she was a teenager. We all saw it, but you couldn't. Why didn't you say something?" I asked, hurt by the revelation. "I tried once or twice," she reminded me gently. "You always defended her. Said I didn't understand what it was like raising a child alone, that you wanted her to have opportunities you didn't have." After a while, it seemed kinder to stay silent. The conversation was painful but healing. Barbara lived in Rhode Island, just a few hours away, and suggested I visit for a weekend. "No one's depending on you now," she pointed out. "You can go where you want when you want. That's something to celebrate, not mourn." She was right, though adjusting to this new freedom took time. The first weekend I would normally have driven to Connecticut, I felt adrift, checking my phone constantly for messages that didn't come. The second weekend was easier. By the third, I had planned a day trip to a coastal town I'd always wanted to explore but never had. 3 months passed without contact from Rebecca. I sent cards to Emma for her birthday and small gifts for no reason, always including my phone number and a note that I loved and missed her. Whether these reached her or were intercepted by Rebecca, I couldn't know. The silence was painful, but I remained resolute in my decision. Then, unexpectedly, Jason called one evening in late summer. "Margaret? It's Jason. I hope it's okay that I'm calling." His voice sounded strained, lacking the confident tone I remembered. "Of course," I replied, surprised. "Is everything all right? Is Emma okay?" "Emma's fine," he assured me quickly. "But things with Rebecca, they've been difficult since your disagreement." He explained haltingly that after I left, Rebecca's spending had accelerated rather than slowed, as if proving she didn't need my financial support. Credit cards were maxed out, payment notices accumulated, and their arguments about money had become increasingly bitter. "I didn't realize how serious it was until I found shopping bags hidden in her closet," he confessed. "Tags still on everything, thousands of dollars of clothes and shoes she didn't need and couldn't afford." When I confronted her, she broke down completely. The revelation of Rebecca's shopping addiction didn't surprise me as much as it perhaps should have. The signs had been there for years in her constant acquisition of things, her emphasis on appearances, her use of purchasing as emotional regulation. "She's agreed to see someone," Jason continued, "a therapist who specializes in compulsive spending. And we've made an appointment with a financial counselor. But she's struggling, Margaret. And she misses you, though she won't admit it." "What are you asking of me, Jason?" I inquired carefully. "Would you consider family therapy? All of us, including Emma? The therapist thinks it might help address some of the underlying issues." I hesitated, torn between hope for reconciliation and fear of falling back into damaging patterns. "I'd need some assurances," I said finally, "that this isn't just another way to access financial support. That real changes are being made." "I understand," Jason replied, sounding genuinely contrite. "And you're right to be cautious. We've already listed the house for sale. We're moving to a smaller place we can actually afford. Rebecca is taking it hard, but she's trying." The news that they were actually downsizing suggested a seriousness I hadn't expected. Still, I proceeded cautiously. "I'll come to therapy," I agreed. "But I'll maintain my boundaries. That's important for all of us." The first session was as difficult as I had anticipated. Rebecca alternated between defensive hostility and tearful accusations. The therapist, Dr. Levine, skillfully moderated, preventing the conversation from spiraling into unproductive blame. "Margaret, could you explain what led to your decision that day?" she asked after Rebecca had shared her version of events. I spoke carefully, conscious of Emma playing quietly in the therapy room's corner. For most of Rebecca's life, I tried to give her everything I could, even when it meant sacrificing my own needs and security. I thought I was showing love, but I realize now I was teaching her that love means unlimited giving without expectations of gratitude or responsibility. Rebecca started to interrupt, but Dr. Levine gently redirected her to listen. When I heard Rebecca speak to Emma the way she did over an accident, I saw myself 20 years ago, struggling with a child I couldn't seem to satisfy no matter what I gave. I didn't want that pattern to continue into another generation. The sessions continued weekly, gradually revealing layers of misunderstanding and hurt on both sides. Rebecca began to acknowledge, hesitantly at first, that her relationship with money and material possessions had become unhealthy. I recognized my own role in establishing those patterns, the ways my guilt over being a single parent had manifested in overindulgence. "My mother died when I was 15, Rebecca shared during one particularly emotional session. I never knew how to process that fear of abandonment except by trying to secure everything around me. Things felt safer than people. "My mother died when I was young too," I reminded her gently. "But I learned the opposite lesson. That things are temporary but relationships endure. Somehow I failed to pass that understanding to you." Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild not the relationship we had before, but something potentially healthier. Rebecca attended specialized therapy for her compulsive spending and joined a support group for similar issues. Jason became more actively involved in their financial management, no longer leaving it primarily to Rebecca as he had for years. And I continued my own parallel work in individual therapy, examining the roots of my enabling behavior and establishing healthier patterns of self-worth not tied exclusively to motherhood. The process was neither quick nor easy, but for the first time in decades it felt honest. One year after walking out of Rebecca's house, leaving my credit card behind in what had felt like both surrender and defiance, I stood in the kitchen of my new condominium. The space was modern, smaller than my old Cape Cod but far easier to maintain, with no stairs to challenge my arthritic knees and lower utility costs that eased my budget concerns. The doorbell rang, and I smoothed my hands over my slacks before answering. Rebecca stood on the threshold, Emma's small hand in hers, Jason carrying a covered dish behind them. "We brought lasagna," Rebecca said, a tentative smile on her face. "I remember it was always your favorite." "It still is," I confirmed, stepping back to welcome them into my new home.
Come in.
"I've been looking forward to this all week." The holiday dinner that followed wasn't perfect. Conversations occasionally stalled, old sensitivities emerged, and both Rebecca and I sometimes retreated into careful politeness. But underneath the awkwardness ran a current of genuine effort and cautious hope that had been absent from our interactions for years. Rebecca and Jason had indeed sold their oversized colonial, moving to a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom home in a less prestigious but perfectly nice neighborhood. The financial counseling had helped them establish a realistic budget that, while requiring significant lifestyle adjustments, had finally brought their spending in line with their income. "It was harder than I expected," Rebecca admitted as we cleared dishes together after dinner. "Not just the practical changes but facing what people would think. I was so worried about judgment." "And was there any?" I asked gently. She shook her head ruefully. "Not really. A few friends drifted away. The ones who were more about social connections than real friendship. But the people who matter didn't care what house we lived in." "That's usually how it works," I observed. "We worry so much about judgment that rarely comes, at least not from people worth keeping in our lives." In the living room, Jason was helping Emma set up the board game we planned to play after dessert. Their easy interaction, the sound of my granddaughter's laughter, filled my new space with warmth that had nothing to do with material possessions. "Mom," Rebecca said quietly, pausing with a plate in her hands, "I've been wanting to say this properly. I'm sorry. For everything. For taking you for granted all those years. For the horrible things I said that day." The apology, delivered without qualification or expectation, represented the culmination of months of therapy and self-reflection. I reached for her hand, noting how similar our hands had become as she approached middle age and I entered my later years. "I'm sorry too," I replied, "for not setting better boundaries, for teaching you that love meant giving without limits. We both deserved better than that." Our reconciliation wasn't a single moment but an ongoing process, marked by continued therapy, occasional setbacks, and gradual rebuilding of trust. Rebecca still sometimes slipped into old patterns of entitlement or materialism, particularly when stressed. I still sometimes enabled when it seemed easier than conflict. But we both recognized these moments more quickly now, and could usually course correct before significant damage occurred. The most healing aspects of our new relationship centered around Emma. At 5, she was observant and sensitive, absorbing the changed dynamics between her mother and grandmother with the remarkable adaptability of childhood. Rebecca had become more mindful of the values she was modeling, making a conscious effort to emphasize gratitude and thoughtfulness over acquisition. "We're doing a gratitude journal," Rebecca explained during one of my regular visits. "Every night before bed, Emma and I each write down 3 things we're thankful for. No repeats allowed." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely impressed by this simple but meaningful practice. "It was Dr. Levine's suggestion," Rebecca admitted. "At first it felt forced, but now, it's changing how I see things. Yesterday Emma was thankful for the rain because it made puddles for jumping. I would have just complained about getting wet." These small shifts in perspective represented significant growth for Rebecca. The journey hadn't been linear. There had been relapses into overspending followed by shame and recommitment to her recovery. But unlike before, she now took responsibility for these slips, rather than expecting bailouts or deflecting blame. My own journey paralleled hers in many ways. The sale of my house had provided financial security I hadn't thought possible, allowing me to finally retire from teaching at 70. My sister Barbara and I had grown closer, planning a long-awaited trip to Ireland to explore our family roots, my first real vacation in decades. "You should come with us," I had impulsively suggested to Rebecca during a phone call about the trip. "That's so kind, Mom, but I think this should be just for you and Aunt Barbara," she replied. "You've earned this trip together. Besides, we're trying to be more careful about vacation spending this year." The response, prioritizing my enjoyment over her own, and acknowledging financial reality without resentment, exemplified how far we had come. The greatest joy of this new chapter was watching Emma absorb healthier attitudes about money, possessions, and relationships than either her mother or I had modeled previously. She delighted in simple pleasures, building fairy houses in the garden with collected twigs and stones, creating elaborate stories with minimal props, treasuring experiences over things. Rebecca had begun bringing Emma to the community garden where I still tended a plot, the 3 of us working together to nurture seedlings into harvest. One Saturday, as Emma carefully watered newly planted tomatoes, Rebecca leaned close to me. "I always thought you were depriving me when you couldn't buy me everything I wanted," she confessed quietly. "Now I realize you gave me everything that actually mattered. I just couldn't see it then." The observation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "We're both seeing more clearly now," I managed. "That's what matters." As I look back on our journey from that breaking point to today, I'm struck by how a moment of crisis became the catalyst for necessary change. The credit card I left behind that day represented more than just financial boundaries. It symbolized the painful but essential lesson that true generosity must include appropriate limits to be healthy and sustainable. I sometimes wonder whether Rebecca and I could have found our way to this healthier relationship without the dramatic rupture that preceded it. Perhaps not. Some patterns are too entrenched, too comfortable despite their dysfunction, to be resolved without a significant disruption. What I know with certainty is that the healing process required courage and humility from both of us. Rebecca had to confront painful truths about her relationship with money and material possessions. I had to acknowledge how my well-intentioned giving had enabled damaging patterns, rather than fostering independence and gratitude. As the afternoon sun slants through my condo windows, illuminating Emma's concentrated expression as she contemplates her next move in our board game, I feel a contentment that has nothing to do with financial security or material comfort. It emerges from something far more valuable: relationships built on mutual respect rather than dependency, love expressed through presence rather than presence, and the quiet satisfaction of having finally broken a cycle that might otherwise have continued into another generation. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between continuing to help someone and setting boundaries for your own well-being? How did you navigate that balance between supporting loved ones and enabling unhealthy patterns? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the most loving thing we can do for others is to stop doing what hurts us both.